Hello, Mike. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming to join us on another session of Broken Bread, where we're studying the book, The Better Covenant, and we're calling this series The Better Covenant Revisited. So we're doing a deeper dive into some of the topics that are covered in that book, and sometimes we go deeper and sometimes we go wider. And let me remind you that even if you're listening to this now, it's possible to go even deeper if you want to. The notes that I work from here in this broadcast are then published on biblebase.com, and you can follow them through and dig down as deeply as you like. And I think you will find some profit there if you're interested in digging deeper and finding some of the significance of the words. The Bible is a wonderful book. It's rich at every kind of level. When you first begin to read it, it speaks to us. It speaks to us powerfully, and it brings life to our hearts. And as you go on and you love it and you trust it more and more, so it speaks more and more deeply. And then if you get into digging occasionally just into the original languages, you find another level again. It is inspired at all kinds of levels of revelation. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. It is the miracle book. There isn't another book like it in the world. So, where are we? Well, we're up to study 45, which I'm calling Romans chapter 8 and the Holy Spirit part 2, because the last time we made a start of this wonderfully but very tightly packed passage, this chapter, where Paul speaks about the work of the Spirit, following on from what he said before. We won't go over that ground again, but it's important that we understand it. So if you're joining us at this point, I would recommend you go back maybe 2 or 3 studies and just get the flow of what we're talking about here. So the last time we were together, we looked at Romans chapter 8 and the Holy Spirit part 1. And I mentioned this verse here in Romans chapter 8, verse 16 following. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. I'm glad it starts at that kind of level. It's so easy, to get swept up into a kind of a false triumphalism, expressed over here in the UK as the idea will win the cup. It's this kind of, it's not real. It may be an expression of something that you believe, but it's kind of turned up to a level where really it isn't the real issue of what's known in the heart by the Spirit. And the wonderful thing is, although Paul is going to say some amazing things about the work of the Holy Spirit, and he does already in this chapter, in fact, there's no false separation between the reality that we live on earth and some sort of theoretical position that we have as a sort of a status in God's eyes. There's no false separation. There's no false triumphalism. This is authentic life in the overlap. We live in 2 places. We live on this earth. It's also possible for us to live in the Spirit on this earth. I've got several little sections here, in fact 4 of them that I want to go through tonight, and I've divided them up. 3 of them fit. My fourth one doesn't quite fit. This is what we're going to do. First of all, I'm going to look at groaning. There is an awful lot of groaning going on in chapter 8, but it's all very constructive groaning. It all has a purpose and an end in view. It's not aimless, pointless suffering. It's the groaning. There's an ache in our world. There is a groaning in our creation. And Paul writes this in Romans chapter 8, verse 16 through to verse 22. He says this. Remember, he just said, we are joint heirs with him, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. So there is a coming future glory. We go, we Christians, not from ignominy to glory, but we actually go from glory to glory. There are different degrees of glory. So having said that there is a future glory, that we may also be glorified together. That's obviously future. He now says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labours with birth pangs together until now." So we live in a wonderful world. At the beginning of Romans, Paul says that the creation itself is testimony to the might and power of God, his unique divinity, his everlasting power, that it is a witness to it, to God's presence. But our creation is damaged. It's in trouble. It aches. It groans. And you get this amazing statement here, Paul speaking by revelation. We know, he says, that the whole creation groans and labours with birth pangs together until now. So this isn't a pointless, aimless suffering. The creation's groaning, the trials it goes through, its physical manifestations of the fact that it's unsettled and it's moving towards something, is expressed here as the labours of birth pangs. There's something new coming, and we're not given all the details as to how that will develop. But the groaning that's going on, the aching that's going on in the creation is not pointless. It's part of a process that's being outworked. Now, you might say, well, yes, and we look on as spectators and think, yes, it's a shame, it's terrible, but the Bible doesn't allow us to look on as spectators. It makes it very clear that we are part of this tension that's in the world in which we live today, where we see the glory of God, the wonderful revelation of the power of God. And we see, as one of the old poets said, nature red in tooth and claw. We see its heights. We see its depths. We see its dust. And we glimpse its destiny. And Christians are not spared from that. We're not in some kind of barrier nursing bubble where it can't get to us. We live in this world. So how do we respond to it? That brings us on to number 2, the groaning of the saints. So having told us that the creation groans and labours with birth pangs together right up until this moment, until now, he then says this, not only that, but we also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit. Okay, so now he is defining a definite group of people here. He is distinguishing between them and all the other human inhabitants of the earth. He's speaking of people who have the first fruits of the Spirit, people who have begun to partake of the powers of an age to come, people who have tasted, and that doesn't mean sample, that means experience, some of the works of the Holy Spirit. We have also tasted the first fruits of the Spirit. I'll read it again. Not only that, it's not only the creation that's growing, not only that, but we also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves. I wonder if you felt this groaning, brothers and sisters, at times when you have felt a kind of a longing. I'm not getting into mystical things here, but just maybe from time to time a sense of the pain of the earth. I feel it quite frequently. Maybe this will surprise you, but I I frequently apologize to dead animals. If I find them, if I hit one in a car or something like that, I stop and just very briefly I pray a very brief homage. You'll say, this man is stark raving mad. Maybe. And I say, I'm sorry. We brought all this on you. The creation itself will be delivered from the bondage of the corruption of the glorious liberty of the sons of God. Because we know that the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. This is why Christians, if they understand that we are part of this creation, we cannot afford to close our ears to the state of our world. I'm not going to get into any depth of this tonight. I just want to say that if you look at any way in which we measure the health, the well-being of the world in which you live, it's in trouble. And we're part of it. And Paul says it's not only the world that's groaning with its labour of birth pangs until now, but he says here in Romans chapter 8 and verse 23, not only that, but we also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, let me put it in brackets, we're not spared. We're not spectators to these events that are going on. Even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for, and there's that word, maybe it surprises you here, sonship, being in the place of a son. And then he explains what he means. In this sense, he means the redemption of our body, because if you think about it, the reversal, the redemption, the reinstating of the way that God intended our world to be was not accomplished when you were born again, when you received the first fruits of the Spirit, when you became the first fruits of the Spirit. That didn't kind of cut you off from all that, because we're still in our mortal flesh. We're still in these tents, as Peter expressed it. And God had told him that he must soon put off this mortal body. It's just a tent. We nightly pitch our moving tent a day's march nearer home, as one of the great old hymns used to say. So we're in this mortal body. And while we're in this mortal body, we are subject to all kinds of attacks that can come upon it, all kinds of dangers that can beset it. And he says here we're eagerly waiting for the redemption of our body, and he calls it sonship, full sonship. We are longing for that, he says. And then he says, for we were saved in this hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. I'm glad it says perseverance in the New King James Version and not patience. Patience can sometimes just mean sitting there doing nothing, waiting for something to happen. I'm waiting for a number 17 bus and I'm hopeful and I'm going to sit here patiently and wait for it. That isn't what's meant by perseverance. And notice it says we eagerly wait. Now, how do you eagerly wait, brothers and sisters? Well, you wait not by sitting and just kind of relaxing until something happens, but you eagerly wait on tiptoe of expectation with the patient endurance that God gives to us in the work of His Spirit. So we're in this world. We're part of it in a physical sense, and the time will come when the body is fully redeemed and we shall have another one. And if you remember the resurrection body of Jesus and the resurrection body even, well, just the spirit bodies, if you like, of the angels, they do not seem to be hindered, troubled, or pressed by the burdens and trials of life. We shall have to wait. It does not yet appear what we shall say. But I want to say something which is, I think, maybe just an important thing to note. There is increasingly in the Western world a kind of a dabbling with Western Oriental mysticisms and all the rest of it. And at the basis of that, the most powerful expression of that probably is Buddhism. Buddhism was a sort of a reform of Hinduism. Hinduism had two reforms. One was called Sikhism and the other is called Buddhism. And Buddhism kind of refined it, eliminated, this is pure Buddhism, it eliminated the gods, these kind of spirits that kind of caused a lot of trouble. But it had an essential understanding, a revelation, its enlightenment. And its enlightenment was this, which was supposed to have come from Gautama Buddha, the original one. This was his revelation. His revelation was that all the suffering that was in the world was caused by desire. All the pain that's in the world is caused originally by desire, because this world is not material. The material aspect of it is in the nature of an illusion. And we have desires to maintain it. We have desires to grow rich and comfortable in it. We have desires to satisfy natural appetites in it. And pure Buddhism says, well, pure Buddhism exists in the purpose of eliminating all desire and pain, so that you become, I'm tempted, they would say kind of quiet and at rest and one with creation. I would say you become dead on the inside. And Jesus referred on one occasion to spiritual warfare. He said that when the enemy holds his refuge, his fortress, he keeps his things in peace. There is a peace which is the peace of death, the peace of lifelessness, the peace which knows no rufflings, no contrary winds, none of these things. Christianity is utterly opposed to that notion. Christianity does not exist and is not part of a process of eliminating these desires so that you settle into some transcendental trance state in which everything is just washed away and you are nothing. That is a vicious lie that keeps millions of people throughout the world enslaved. We are part of this creation. Jesus felt its pain. We feel its pain. We do not insulate. We don't seek it. That would be the opposite kind of folly. That would be kind of a sadistic kind of sadism, masochism, where people who enjoy pain are sick. People who want to experience pain are sick. Buddhism thinks it's found a way of eliminating all these things and thinks it's nirvana. That was a big sigh. That was me groaning for our creation. And men and women who are held in the quiet, peaceful bonds of a state where they feel and desire nothing. So we saints groan. If you can watch some of the current news reporting that's going on of the conflicts in the middle of Europe, or the conflicts that are going on in other parts of the world, and not sigh, I think something has happened to your humanness. Incidentally, that's what kind of inspired Buddha. So the legend goes, he was a wealthy prince of a very wealthy father, and a barrier had been put around him so that he would not see pain and poverty and disease and the troubles of ordinary men. And then one day he kind of left that place of apparent peace and saw the suffering and the pain, and he began to wonder what it was all about, and decided that it was ultimately the desire to come back again in another reincarnation, and that if you could eliminate all desires, including that one, then that was nirvana, and it was a place of perfect oneness with the Atman spirit. It's a lie. It's a lie. I'll read it again. Not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. For we were saved in this hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. Before we move on to the second groaning, I want to introduce you to something that Paul says about the Spirit that follows on from this involvement that we have with the world's groaning. This is what he says. This is Romans chapter 8 and verse 26. I'm just taking the first phrase from it. He says, likewise the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses. Now we're going to come on to the groaning spirit shortly. So we've had the groaning creation. We've touched on the groaning saints. We're heading on the way to the groaning spirit. But the groaning saints and the groaning spirit are linked with this little phrase where Paul says in Romans 8 and verse 26, likewise the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses. Now, here's an interesting thing. There is a tendency for men to find a kind of identity and unity, fellowship in their strengths, and it tends to make people boast of their strengths. They don't boast of their weaknesses. They don't speak of their weaknesses. They speak of their strengths. They speak of the strength of my church or my family or my football team. Or it's not often you hear people boasting about the weakness of their football team. Unless, of course, you come from Burslem and your football team is Port Vale, then it just goes with the territory, as they say. I'm just joking. The women, the sisters, are much more ready to acknowledge their vulnerabilities, their frailties, their weaknesses. Let's use this word. This word that we're going to come across, a weakness here, has to do with, it's literally without strengthnesses. Of course, that wouldn't sound very good. And weakness does the job. It's just a way of saying we don't have all that we would like to do. We don't have all the strength. We don't have all the emotional strength. We don't have all the physical strength. We don't have all the every element of strength. We don't have all that we need. And some of our strengths are not complete, so we are without strengths. Vulnerabilities is a good word, but it's just not a Bible word. But there's a Bible word, I think, here that does the job. Weaknesses, strengthlessnesses. This is interesting. He doesn't say that the Holy Spirit comes to obliterate our strengthnesses. He doesn't come to say, I'm going to take away all your weaknesses so that you can be strong and that you can resist the enemy and you can win all your battles. He doesn't say that at all. He says the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses. And this word help is an absolute gem. It's a wonderful, wonderful word. It's a long one. In fact, it's 3 words put together. You've got one word, lambano, which really means to take hold of something. There are 2 words in Greek for receiving. One is passive, which is dekamai, which is like a beggar holding out his hands for you to put something in him. But there's another one, which is lambano, which actually means to take hold of something. Now, this lambano word has another word attached to it in the front, and it's the Greek preposition anti, A-N-T-I, anti. Now, anti, you may think it means in opposition to. It doesn't mean in opposition to technically. It means opposite to. In other words, facing it. I know when people get facing one another, you often can develop opposition. But the word itself just means opposite to. So it's got 3 parts. The third part is you take hold of something. The second part is that you face one another. And then the third part is another preposition. Say you've got two prepositions, one in front of another. And this first preposition is soon, which is S-U-N, which means together. So you've got a long word here. It's a very long word. It's really three words kind of joined together. And it means together, opposite to one another, taking hold. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, I wonder if you've ever needed to lift something where there were two of you who were lifting it. In my youth, I would kind of sometimes help people moving house, and on more than one occasion, I have helped people move pianos. Now, pianos aren't light things to move, and some people think that if you just get hold of it, you can just move it 6 inches at a time. But there's another way, and that is if you can get a piece of sacking. This is how the professionals do it. If you can get a piece of sacking and put it under the piano, and one of you stands one side and the other stands the other, and then you wrap the sacking around your wrists and hold it, and then you say, okay, are you ready? Now. And in that moment, you can, together, opposite to one another, take hold. It's the picture of someone coming to assist us to lift something that we haven't got the strength to lift ourselves. Not to say, now you stand aside and I'll do it, but in this instance to come to help us in our weaknesses. Likewise, the Spirit also helps us in our weaknesses. He comes, in the picture language, to stand opposite to us, to say, get hold of this, we're going to do this together. Are you ready? Together, lift. It's a great picture, isn't it? And it's the word is used. Of course, it doesn't mean whenever people use this long word, they wouldn't think, oh, you've got to go through that whole picture thing. It simply means someone coming to help you to do something you can't do on your own. And it's used 2 or 3 times in the Bible. One interesting place is in the story of Martha and Mary. Do you remember this? Lazarus' sister. And it says this in Luke's Gospel, chapter 10, verse 40. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him, that's Jesus, and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to, together in opposition to one another, to lift the burden together. No, she didn't. She just says, therefore tell her to help me. But it's this same word. She isn't wanting Mary to take over. She isn't saying, I've had enough now. It's my turn to sit down at your feet and listen. She's just asking for Mary, asking Jesus to tell Mary to come and help her with this task, because she's conscious that she's been left to serve alone. And it's used in that old Greek version of the Bible, the Septuagint. You remember this version? This is the version that was translated from Hebrew into Greek, into a kind of a Greek called Koine Greek, about 200 years before Christ. And it was supposedly done by 70 rabbis in 70 days. So they call it the 70, which is, and the Latin word for that is Septuagint. Now, it uses this word 3 times, and I think it's really wonderfully illustrative in the way it does it. This is Exodus chapter 18 and verse 22, and it's that story when Moses comes to God and he says, well, in the first instance, this is Jethro who says, you need to you need help with this. It's going to crush you, this burden of all these people. He might have said you're going to burn out if he'd been living in our era. And this is what he says. He says, let them, he says, choose people of ability and get them by your side and delegate some of this responsibility. And he says, and let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. Listen to that little phrase. They will bear the burden with you. It's a great word, a great phrase to translate this word helps. Listen, likewise the Holy Spirit also bears the burden with us in our weaknesses. And when that same story is repeated or is recounted later on, God says to Moses, that was Jethro's solution, organization. God has another solution, the Spirit. And later on in Numbers chapter 11, God says to him, I will come down and talk with you there. I will take the Spirit that's upon you and will put the same upon them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you, that you may not bear it yourself alone. Can you hear that? Bearing the burden. It's a wonderful, wonderful word. Let's put it in that thing, shall we? And it's with its meaning. Likewise, the Spirit will bear the burden with us in our weaknesses. That's fellowship. Of course, he could come and do the whole thing and say, you just said that. And sometimes he does say that. Sometimes he says, be still and know that I'm God. That's really a very gentle way of saying, keep your hands off this, let me do it. But here he says the Spirit will bear the burden with us in our weakness. Can you see now why Paul, when he wrote to the Corinthians, said, I'm not fighting my weaknesses any longer. I'm glorying in them, because when I'm weak, then I'm strong. He did not say he takes away our weaknesses and makes us strong. He said he comes and bears the burden with us in our weakness. Every trial is God's opportunity to come and fellowship with us. It's wonderful. Really is just wonderful. Okay, so that was like just introducing to you the Spirit as the helper. So we've had the groaning creation, and we've touched on the groaning saints, and we've introduced the helping Spirit, and now we come on to number 4, which begins at that same point where we just were. Likewise, the Spirit also helps us in our weaknesses. For we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Isn't this an amazing thing? This is an amazing thing. Likewise, the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses, for we do not know what we should pray for as we ought. But the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Now he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to, and most of our versions will say, the will of God. That doesn't give a wrong idea, but that isn't quite what it says, because he, that's the Holy Spirit, makes intercession for the saints according to God. His reference point is God. His source of strength and ability is God. It's an amazing thing. According to God. So the Spirit comes and he speaks. Even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. For we are saved in this hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. Why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it. Eagerly, brothers and sisters, eagerly, on tiptoe of expectation, not slumped in a heap, waiting until the bus comes, but waiting upon God, not waiting for the number 17, but waiting upon God, being available to him, because the Spirit helps. I do love this word. I do love this wonderful word. He comes alongside and facing us. We put our hands under the same burden and he says, okay, now lift. And we find that we can do what we could not do. That our weakness is no longer our inability, but has become our qualification for the Spirit's fellowship and help. So there's the Spirit groaning. These really are very wonderful words. And we have this assurance that the Spirit of God comes and makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. So we have what a picture this is, the earth groaning, and we with it, even we who have the first fruits of the Spirit, that groan, that ache, that longing. When Jesus was in Gethsemane, he groaned. When he looked over Jerusalem, he groaned. That is a great groan, a great oh in the creation. And if we are sensitive to it, we shall hear it and fear it, feel it, and not isolate ourselves from it, not turn our backs on it, not say, oh, this is too much for me, but we will go to him and we'll say, Lord, I've read that there is a Spirit who will come and stand in fellowship with me, and we'll join our labours together, and we will see this thing through. Did you ever hear that 1 plus God is always a majority? God will achieve what he wants to achieve. These are wonderful things. Do read this passage and read this thing. This is where we shall pause today. This is what it says. He will make intercession for the saints, because in the next verses we're going to read about the saints, but not tonight. God willing, we'll do that next time we're together. But in the meantime, it is possible for God's people to pray in the will of God. There are sometimes we don't know, and we have to say, Lord, if it be your will. There are sometimes when God will make his will clear to us by the strengthening of his Spirit, and we'll know that this time we know what the will of God is. We can pray with assurance, and we can lift that impossible burden. Paul actually uses an extraordinary phrase. He says we are co-workers together with God. Yes, he could do it all on his own, but he's chosen to do it in synergy, in cooperation, in oneness, in unity with those who are his own. What a prospect. Next time you're faced with an impossible weight to carry, just remember that. I think I mentioned this to you before, but it was Hudson Taylor who used to say, works for God usually have 3 distinct stages, he used to say. Difficult, impossible, and done. Do come and join us next week. God bless you.